Hi, and welcome to Matt Holman Talks Mental Health, the podcast where I have the opportunity to sit down and talk to amazing humans about their journeys with mental health. For this episode, I'm very happy to introduce Lildonia to the conversation. Hi, Lildonia.
Hello, Matt. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's lovely to see you. Lovely to meet you as well. And as I would do very quickly, I'll just do a very quick introduction to how we got to record this podcast, because I think this is incredible, by the way, for everybody that's listening. So please do tune in. And then I'll let you do your full introduction, let people know all about you, what you do, and where you're heading. So we've only known each other for, I would say at the point of this recording, 2 days,
Yes.
maybe. We connected earlier this week. There was an opportunity to sit down and to have a conversation. So as always, I never like to miss the opportunity to sit down and record a conversation. So we're here, we're talking about mental health. We're both mental health first aid instructors as well. And I'm sure there's a lot of other similarities in our passions towards these subjects. But anyway, I'm going to throw it back over to you. I'm going to get you to do your introduction, please, to everybody. Please tell people more about who you are and what you do.
Thank you so much, Matt. So yes, I am a mental health and well-being coach. So similar to you, my big passion is mental health and supporting people to feel good about themselves, to feel well, and to be able to have conversations about their mental health and well-being. And really, my work is a mixture of one-to-one coaching, um, mainly with lots of key workers, so with workers from the NHS, with social workers, with teachers, um, and also supporting individuals in corporate organisations, so delivering mental health first aid training, mental health awareness. And then another strand is around well-being from an EDI strand. So a lot of my work is around coaching for people of colour or supporting people of colour or racialised communities. So it's quite a mixed bag, but all related to my big passion of supporting people to improve and sort of have that autonomy around their mental health and well-being.
Brilliant. No, and I definitely, it sings to a lot of the sort of realities of my space as well, what we're trying to do to make
Mm.
sure everybody gets access to the right information and helping support them through those journeys. So fantastic, lovely to have you on this conversation today. The big question I always ask in these recordings is about your journey with mental health. I'm going to sit back and I'm going to let you just tell us a bit of a story about who you are, your experience, your journey, because there's a reason why you do what you do today. And I really want to help the listeners and with the listeners to understand more about you. So there you go. So your journey with
Yeah.
mental health, I'll leave it with you.
Okay. Thank you. So my journey, similarly to many people, I would imagine, is quite a long journey, but I'll try and compress it. And it's really, there are three main points that stick out to me when I think of my mental health journey. And in sort of my earlier years, my childhood, my teens, I was, quite a sort of, I would say, average young person. But in my late teens, I experienced some difficult, traumatic incidences, a couple of them in a row. And although I was kind of past those developmental ages, I was still, becoming a young adult. And that really made the world quite a fearful place for me. And when I was in my late teens, I developed quite severe anxiety following the loss of a family member. And at the time, I didn't really know what exactly it was, which was quite strange because I was on a psychology degree at the time. But I was feeling fearful around the world, about the world. I was having palpitations. I was worried to go out. I was not doing my usual activities. And eventually, after going to the GP, I was diagnosed with anxiety. And I dealt with anxiety on and off from my late teens into my early 20s. I completed my psychology degree. I started working in the field. And when I was working one-to-one with students who were experiencing mild to moderate mental health. And it was almost a strange parallel experience because I was dealing with my own mental health struggles and I was watching the young people deal with theirs. And at that point, I wasn't even that much older than them. And this went on, and I tried to find different ways to overcome these struggles with anxiety. I tried, sort of CBT, I tried talking therapies, I tried all sorts of things. And eventually my path aligned that I found yoga. So I'm also a yoga instructor, and it's a very big part of my physical and spiritual practice. And through the path of yoga, I learned meditation. And I always say, with looking after our mental health, there's no one shoe fits all. For some people, EMDR is going to work for them. For another person, CBT. And for me, talking and moving and the practice of yoga was really, really special for me. So as I began to learn about the yogic practices, teachings about being in the moment, about being present, which is completely opposite to anxiety, which takes us all the way to the future. I learned how to center myself in the here and now. And I remember a very specific and poignant meditation that I had, where I sat in my meditation seat and just a thought came to me that said, when you're anxious, you create all of these alternate realities that are really nerve-wracking, really fear-inducing, and that all comes from your mind. And if that comes from your mind, you can actually create something wonderful from the very same space. And I would say that was my turning point into a place of recovery, healing, and becoming anxiety free. And I think that was like a real strong driver for me to move forward and take myself to where I am now, which is thankfully healthy and well.
Amazing. Well, it's incredible. You've sort of taken that journey and you've recognized it, learned about it, and really understood. And you know, that's the thing that I always try to help people to understand through these conversations as well, is, you know, for the listeners' point of view, you know, it's about reflecting on what's really going on so you can see it. Can you talk a little bit more around sort of those feelings you were experiencing when that anxiety was starting to sort of show itself, to give sort of listeners a bit more insight into that?
So with the anxiety, I was really always thinking about the worst case scenario.
Yep.
So if I had to do something, an interview, start a new job, do an exam, go to a place I was unfamiliar with, I would create a whole story about all the different things that could go wrong along the way. And as I got into that mental pattern, it would start to become physical. So I'd have the heart racing. I might get hives. I might feel itchy. I might get a dry throat. And this was just a constant cycle that I would go through multiple times throughout the day. And I really remember a specific incident where I was at work. I'd had seen all these students throughout the day who were stressed and worried and anxious. And I remember at lunchtime thinking, I just need a break. And I was in my office and I pulled down the blinds and I locked the door. And I remember going to sit in a cupboard and just having a cry. And that was in the middle of my working day. And don't get me wrong, we all have moments where we need a good cry. But I knew at that time, okay, this isn't quite right. This isn't how I should be feeling. This has gone too far. And that was when I really realized, okay, I need to see what I can do to get some support with this.
Yeah. And so that reaching out for that support. Oh, there's a bit of feedback on there. Sorry, I don't know if it was feedback on your side as well. But in terms of reaching out for that support, what was the first step? Because obviously with anxiety, one of the biggest fear is talking about the thing that's going on. So how did you make that step?
I made that step by going to the GP.
Okay. Yeah.
And when I went to the GP gave different options. You know, usually they'll make you fill out a form. And I got referred to a cognitive behavioral therapist. So I got referred for talking therapy. So I felt quite comfortable to open up and talk to the GP and disclose what was going on. But what I wasn't quite comfortable with was at that time talking to my friends and family about it. And I come from a very therapeutic family. My mum's a therapist. My dad is a counselling lecturer, but I still was really scared to be open about what I perceived at the time to be a failing, whereas really at the time I was just a human. Yeah. So when I reached out to the GP, they offered some CBT. I went for a few sessions, and that really started my journey into exploration around different modalities that would be able to support me.
Wow. And what was the turning point when you started to talk to the family? How did they react when you eventually were able to speak about it?
Thankfully, I was very lucky, and they were very, very supportive. Right. It's when there's a shame around things, it can be, we just need to turn on the light. We need to turn on the light and show that thing that we're shameful about, and it reduces the power. But I'd kept this fear in the dark so long that I didn't know what would happen if I turned on the light. And thankfully, when I did, my family said, you know, we understand, we're here for you. It's nothing to be ashamed of. We all have difficult times. And I think having that support around me and knowing that actually, this is okay, this is something I can get through, this is something that isn't shameful, that was something that I think really helped me on the path to healing and recovery.
And that is such a big part for so many people, isn't it? In terms of having that, it is that light, the ability to sort of say openly that this is what's going on, and it's a scare and a fear for lots of people today, and not just with anxiety issues, but depression and all the other disorders
Yeah.
that we know very well. There's a lot of that about, and a lot of people struggling with those challenges today. I find it fascinating that in terms of sort of, you're very lucky to have that support around you, of course.
Yeah.
And I always reflect on my experiences. I was very lucky to have the support of family and friends, people who didn't give up on me, and and I think that's such an important part. But of course, not everybody has that, and
Yeah.
that is a big challenge, isn't it? So in terms of sort of taking that forward then to this role, and I love the fact that you've connected the physical and the spiritual and all those elements together. When and at what moment did you think, actually, I should do this? How did that come about?
I think so. After I managed to support myself for anxiety, I was still working in my roles, and I was already qualified as a coach, and I was sort of doing my thing. But then I became physically poorly, and I had a diagnosis of endometriosis, and I had to have surgery. So that went through a different healing journey. I had to do lots of physical things like nutritional therapy, herbal medicine, and all of these kind of things, and get myself through what would have been prior a very anxiety provoking scenario. So a lot of my fears were around health and illness, and to be unwell was very scary for me. And I came through the surgeries, I got through, and I started to feel a lot better. And I said to myself, I've actually taken myself through a quite severe mental health diagnosis and condition, and then a quite severe physical health diagnosis and condition. And I said, if I'm not in a space to do this work and support others now, then I never will be. And I just felt something click. So when I qualified, when I was, sort of 21, I could support and guide, but now it was from a real deep experiential perspective. And I think that was the moment when my professional life really just catapulted, because I had a deeper understanding and connection to what my clients were going through.
Yeah, and that's something that I think we all value so much more, isn't it? Is when you have that experiential element to it, because you can talk about textbooks, you can talk about the way people write. Actually, talking about your own personal perspective is quite powerful, isn't it? That's what this is about, which is why I love these conversations. You're talking about your perspective. I've not lived your journey, and to understand your journey, I have to ask you to tell me it. And it's fascinating, isn't it? So obviously you worked a lot with younger people, and that was sort of the first pathway in for you, wasn't it? How do you feel about sort of younger people now, in terms of sort of that world, that space, and the mental health things that you may have seen and experienced?
So one thing that I think is really positive about our younger generation is they are so switched on. They have an awareness about mental health. They have an awareness of identity. They have an awareness of climate change. They are so educated and informed. And this upcoming generation are really passionate about making the world a better place, which is something that is so I love. But what I've noticed that is also difficult is they have a very different set of pressures to perhaps older generations, such as those who didn't grow up with the internet. So I've definitely seen the juxtaposition of having so much knowledge and awareness with the online social media pressures. And I've seen that. I mean, there's lots of studies around social media use and mental health. And I've seen that have a real difficult impact on the young people that I've worked with mental health, unfortunately, especially following the pandemic, which saw screen time and social media usage catapult.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It really did, didn't it? Sorry, every time I'm speaking at the beginning, it starts to come in a bit loud. Does it come in loud on you as well? You're okay?
No, I can hear
Not hearing it.
okay.
Maybe it's just feedback for me. So apologies if anybody listening hears any feedback. But you're absolutely right. So that has catapulted a lot of the challenges and a lot of the screen time elements as well. And we're recording this on a screen that we would, but in days gone by, we'd have been sat in a room together talking about these things, of course. So it has changed the dynamic quite a lot. So in sort of, and of course you're now working more with adults and the world of adults and the communities that you work within. So where's your work gone now? What are you sort of focusing on? And I know you've got some things about Conscious Conversation Club. Talk about those things. Tell us a bit about what you're doing, because I'm fascinated.
Oh, okay. So really my work has gone to that. I'm no longer on the sort of shop floor working with young people so much. I'm now more supporting professionals who support others. So that's where my work with teachers, doctors, nurses, pharmacists come in. And I'm really passionate about supporting people to look after their well-being while they're trying to provide a support provision to others. And then after 2020, when we saw, the very sad loss of George Floyd and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, I then began to see a real need for supporting communities of color, supporting Black communities. And that's when I ended up doing a lot more work in those spaces. So specific coaching projects for people of color we'll talk about whatever they need, but there are very specific elements if you are from a racialized population. So those are the kind of main areas. It was really the 2020 experience that brought us to that, because we had the pandemic on one side, which was putting a lot of pressure on caring professionals. And then we had the Black Lives Matter movement, which was putting a lot of pressure on racialized communities. And those two things have kind of led to that being a big proportion of my work, really. And I love it and I value it. And I think we need more of it. Yeah.
Totally agree. Yeah, I think we do. I think we need so much more awareness and conscious support to these conversations, and
yes,
people through it.
Yeah, and so some of the things that you mentioned, like conscious conversation clubs, is I don't only provide support and information for people who are from racialized communities or of color, but also people who are white and want to support. So sometimes I run workshops for allies or conversation clubs for allies, because there are so many people out here who want to give back, who want to support, who want to work towards a healthier society, an anti-racist society, but they don't know quite where to start. And I'd like to provide a supportive, sort of judgment-free space where we can learn together and bridge that gap, because I think sometimes it's been a bit of a fearful space, but I think we're actually in like a very positive place where we are able to have these conversations with less fear than we had maybe even 5 years ago. So I like to do a lot of that work as well.
Brilliant, and good luck to you with all of that as well. And I'm sure there'll be so many people who want to get involved in learning more. And I genuinely do as well. I think there's such an important moment for all of us to just sort of take notice of the fact that there is differences between how we're able to go about our lives, and it's appreciating and understanding that a little bit more. And I think that genuinely, we look at obviously we're talking about mental health in primarily here, but it does get impacted because of these challenges that people are experiencing. Do we recognize that? Do we understand and appreciate that all the time? I don't think we do. I think there's still a lot of learning to be done for all of us, and in terms of really understanding how that impacts. Do you think that's a fair sort of statement? Would you?
I would completely agree. And for example, I would, think of that time when we were in the pandemic. We were absorbing a lot of media. We were looking at the news a lot. And when we're here, we're seeing, for example, repeated videos of very traumatic incidents. And like the George Floyd incident, and people are watching that, and young people of color are watching that and getting into absolute fear response, fight or flight, but not having a space to discuss, actually, I'm experiencing vicarious trauma from watching that. What does that mean for me? What does that mean for my family? Can I let my son go to school? Can I let my partner leave the house? All of these kind of fears. And these are very specific things that actually need to be addressed in their entirety. We can't sort of lump them together as just mental health or race. There's a very unique interplay.
Yeah. And do you think people are willing to have those conversations still? Do you think people are really attuned to those now?
I think we're in a lot better place than we were. I think there is a lot of space for these conversations. Before, when I was doing some of this work, it was very underground. And some people talk about performative allyship with maybe companies ticking boxes, but I'd rather companies were ticking boxes and at least we could get somewhere than it's not even on the agenda at all. So actually, I feel quite positive about where we are now in terms of having these conversations and getting these trainings out here, and I feel in a good space about it.
I love that. Well, I think that's great, and I think that's what we need, isn't it? It's more positive energy around this, because as we
Yeah.
know, you just spoke about the news and what they show and what they share and how
Mm,
it was during COVID. And my biggest frustration, and it still sits now, is we just show the rubbish stuff. We just show negative.
yeah.
It's all negative all the time, and we need more forces for good like yourself, though, to be able to push out that positive energy to people. And it can become infectious, right? It can
Yeah.
we can all get into that sort of mode if we take ourselves to that space where we can
Mm,
see those opportunities to make change. It really is
mm,
so important, isn't it?
mhm.
So other big things then that you see coming for you, what sort of else do you want to sort of champion with the work that you're doing?
Mm. So I would like to see more of this work in terms of training in corporate environments. So workforces are really diverse. We have carers, we have people with disabilities, we have members of the queer community, we have racialized people. And at the moment, wellbeing provision can be quite generic. There's those memes that go around on the internet of like staff being stressed and then being given a 20-minute webinar. Whereas what I really would like to see, and myself delivering, is a lot more specific, tailored content to the demographic of various organizations. Because I think once you start to make people feel seen, valid, comfortable, that's improvement on their mental health, that's improvement of creating a family culture within the organization, staff retention, so many positive things. So I really want to work to deliver more bespoke mental health training for diverse communities. That's really sort of where I'm passionate about and where I'm heading.
I think it's such a great sort of concept and thought as well, and I really think that's a valuable thing for future training deliveries anyway.
Mm,
I think a lot of companies, correct me if you don't see it different, if you see it differently, of course, but from my perspective, a lot of companies are looking for a singular sort of program. This is the
yes.
program, this is how it works.
Mm,
And you know what, you've just educated me on something else, which is the diversity within the organization needs to be treated with respect to the individual parts of that,
mm,
and taking those pieces apart and deconstructing some of that sometimes, I think, is so important, isn't it? We're talking
mm,
about a big conversation within our organization about, I don't know how you feel about this conversation as well, is menopause, and
yes,
so
menopause is a big one that we just sort of ignore, but half of the population go through.
yeah.
It's things like that, but we'll happily talk about other elements of life.
Mm,
And I remember a specific time when I was working with an organization, and we were talking about the flexible working policy during the pandemic, which many organizations' flexible working policy was quite rigid prior to the pandemic. And we actually had to look at, okay, what group of people is this negatively impacting? And we had to look at parent carers who were completely shut off from options during the pandemic in terms of having to change their hours, in terms of homeschooling. So if that organization is just thinking about well-being across the board, well, maybe these parent carers can't do lunchtime seminars. Maybe what would be better for them is to be able to shift their hours during the day, or have access to an app that they can use in short bursts. So it's really about that tailored approach.
no, absolutely. And I think that's where a lot of companies will need to start to factor those elements in as well, in
Mm,
terms of, not everybody can do it in the same way at the same time
yeah.
in the same groups. And that is a big challenge, of course, especially where the workplace is becoming more, I don't want to say fragmented, but there is this sort of hybrid model of working, isn't there? And interestingly,
Mm,
that leads into something that I did want to just ask you about, because obviously you've just spent 6 weeks in another country working in terms of virtual working.
yeah.
How did that come about? What was the motivation for that for you?
Yes, well, so in 2020, like all of us, or most of us, should I say, I was working from home, and I had to quickly switch from face-to-face everything to online everything. And after about 7 months of the pandemic, I was over it, as a lot of people were. And I said to my partner, I said, we got to get out of here. And he said, where should we go? And I said, well, we should go to your hometown in Italy. And so we packed up the car, which was a very small Audi TT,
Yeah.
and we drove all the way to Italy non-stop. It took us 27 hours, and we stayed there for 4 months, and I worked from there. And after that moment, I said, well, I don't need to stay in one place. If I'm online, I can do work from wherever. And actually, that's of benefit to my mental health, because pizza, pasta, and sunshine is very good for me. And it makes me feel wonderful. So if for 6 weeks out of the year I can have that while still supporting and serving my clients and customers, then why not? And so that's sort of the energy that I'm, continuing to cultivate, and onwards and upwards for 2023, I hope.
Oh, I'm really jealous. I really am. Pizza, pasta, and sunshine. I think that's just it's incredible. And I know I've got a few digital nomad friends out there who they strongly live this thought of you can work from anywhere and there's no boundaries really. There's very few restrictions to do that necessarily. But oh my gosh, I'm very, very jealous. Very jealous of that, because I would love to go and work in a sunny country for 6 weeks or 6 years, maybe.
6 weeks or 6 years.
Yeah, something like that, right? It's fascinating. I think you've got an incredible sort of perspective, and obviously a very valuable one as well, in terms of where you've been on your journey with that sort of understanding anxiety. We're coming towards the end of this session. It feels like this time just has disappeared very quickly, like all these conversations do. I'm going to ask you sort of your final thoughts in a moment, just around anything you want to share with people, anything you want people to understand, or any sayings or quotes or things that you live your life by. But, from me, as I always do, I just want to say a huge thank you for coming on, and for very quickly mobilizing into recording an episode of this podcast together, which I just find, I love that. It makes my heart sing and it smiles as well. So, but thank you. But throw it over to you. Last thoughts, anything you want to share, anything you want to say?
I think my 2 quotes that I live by is, number 1, where the mind goes, the energy flows. So essentially, whatever we focus on is what comes to fruition. Yep. And that is really important with everything, but definitely with what I've been through with anxiety. And another one is, if you don't make time to cry, your organs will, which is a very beautiful, sad, poignant, but true quote about we need to release our emotions, and if we don't, we'll hold it in our body. And that's always a reminder for me whenever I am struggling with my mental health, that I need to let it out. Otherwise, my body will find a way to make sure I rest and get it out somehow. So those are the 2 quotes that I think I use to guide me on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I've never heard either of them, and now I have. So I feel enlightened. Thank you for sharing those. And I think you are just you are such a ball of positive energy, and I think that's so powerful. And obviously you work hard to make sure you keep on that side of positivity, and I absolutely adore that. I love that. So thank you so much for sharing your story and your journey, and
thank you,
and what you've said. So really appreciate that. For anybody that's listening, if you would like to know more, Lildonia, are you okay if somebody would reach out to you if they needed
to? Yes, I'm absolutely fine. The best place to reach out to me is either on Instagram, it's my name @Lildonia.Lawrence, or on my website, which is www.movewithlildonia.com, and there you can find out more about if you want me to come into your workplace, or if you want to work with me one-to-one, or you just want to come and have a chat about some of the things that you've heard today. More than welcome. I would love to hear from you.
Movewithlildonia.com. I love that. It's got a great ring to it, hasn't it? Yeah. Fantastic stuff. Listen, thank you so much for participating today. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I hope everybody's enjoyed listening to this podcast episode. If anybody else out there would like to join me, we can mobilize this quite quickly, where time permits, of course. But it's amazing. Look what we can do with a few minutes and a Zoom video and a recording for this. So brilliant stuff. Listen, take care of yourself. Look after yourself.
Thank you so much.
Keep the energy high, and I'll be following your story as well. Now we're connected. I'll be following you as well. So,
yes, thank you so much, Matt. All the best.
Wish you all the best. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Take care.